religions. And when it began, I think they discovered that the values that all of us have are very similar. And so we can advocate at the legislature in many things that we agree on. Not, even though we don't agree on what religion we practice, we can agree on that. And I wanted to say that today's service really fit right into this topic that we have today. In the prayer, it said, "Bring us inspiration of your spirit to do what is right." And at the end, we said, God is at work in you. So this is an example of how God is at work in me. I've always been involved in politics of some shape for a long time, but this is one that is interfaith, and you work with all faiths in order to kind of meet the needs of many people in our state that don't have a voice for themselves. So I'm happy that some of you are here, and Kathryn's the expert, so that's why I'm glad she's here.
Great. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much to Bob, to Bethlehem for hosting me here today, to Mary for all that she's done for social justice over the years, and hoping to hear more from you all, what you care about and how you're thinking about putting your faith and values into action, and how we might be able to build on the good work that you all are already doing here today. So I already got a fantastic intro from Bob, thank you. And so again, my name is Kathryn Lozada, Southern Minnesota organizer with Isaiah. I've been in this role for 6 years now, which has felt like half pandemic times, half semi-regular times, and excited to engage with more congregations in this kind of conversation about how are we really now, and what do our communities need. And we've made a lot of strides towards making Minnesota reflect our values, that everyone is worthy of dignity and respect, that most human beings want to care for one another and our loved ones and have enough resources to thrive. And how do we do that on a larger and larger scale, in addition to the interpersonal relationships, in addition to the ways that we do community locally. So more of my background is thinking about those systems of how we love our neighbors in everything that we do, and that came from my faith community growing up. So I was raised in a very social justice oriented Presbyterian church. I kind of affectionately call it a hippie church, with wonderful elders that I got to learn from when I was growing up, and witness how they lived out caring for the environment, caring for immigrants and welcoming the stranger and the refugee. And in prayer time, simultaneously lifting up like somebody who was ailing in the congregation that we needed to pray for, and also calling on our government to be a better neighbor when there was strife in the Middle East, for example, or in Latin America, and thinking about how our government can be a better neighbor with neighboring countries, or how we treat one another in our communities, and thinking about how we address the Band-Aid needs of our communities and also swim upstream to think about the systems that are creating those needs in the first place, and can we interrupt some of those systems so that we can have more just systems, so that people can have what they need. There's always going to be the need for Band-Aids, probably, and what is the hard, year-round, long-term work to shape our systems so that they work for everybody. So I, as a young person, even growing up with a really amazing faith community, and elders other than my parents, as an only child that I could look up to and learn from, that mattered a whole lot. And we had intergenerational opportunities. We did musicals. I got to be like the weird nerdy kid, and many of my elders like cared for me and looked out for me so much. And it felt like such a wonderful, beloved community to grow up in, and at the same time, always asking those questions of, we know humans aren't perfect, but how do we love our neighbors, love God in everything that we do? And I had a hard time reconciling. My home church felt so unique, and I see examples all the time of humans hurting each other, sometimes using organized religion to justify that. And I know there's so many more faith communities out there now, that are asking the same questions my home church was. So I'm really excited to connect with more people, more congregations like you all, and hear how you're thinking about those questions and how we can partner so that these values are shining through everywhere, right? Because most people want to love our neighbors, right? Let's figure it out together. And I'm glad that I got more of the systems level view when I was younger and in my education. And it was hard to figure out, how do I feel this call to social justice? How do I try to do the good work and pay the bills at the same time? Where am I meant to do that work? And for a long time, I did more of the nonprofit side of things and narrowed it down of all the injustices in the world to more of the US Latin America relationships, work with more of immigration and education equity, kind of the nexus of those systems. After college, got the opportunity to go with the Presbyterian Church USA Young Adult Volunteer Program, which I know the Lutherans had something similar, to do a year on the US-Mexico border and host delegations of people from churches and schools to understand how our systems, how our policies were affecting regular people in the borderlands. And that it's much more complex than we might read about in headlines. And regular people are trying to figure out, how do they care for their families and have very different decisions to make just by where they were born. And that humans put the borders there. God didn't put the borders there. And it's a set of human decisions that have created the situations that we have now, and there's a lot we can do about it. And hearing those perspectives of people that were trying to figure out, like, okay, our circumstances in our home country are not working for us. It's scary and dangerous, and I need to take a risk to care for my family. And also people with huge hearts living on this side of the border, thinking about, how do we welcome the immigrant and the stranger here? And that was part of my home church's decision before I was born, even in the 80s, to become part of the sanctuary movement. Does that sound familiar to people? I see some nods, because I know also you all have been active in that work of welcoming the stranger with the Cruz family and working with other churches these days, right? You all have been doing that active work, and that is hard work and takes a lot of time and energy, and our systems should be better set up for that, right? But in the 80s, when our government had a role in governments in Central America hurting their people, and people needed to flee and came here, then our government couldn't recognize them as refugees, even though they were fleeing violence in their home countries. And so a set of churches started in Tucson, Arizona, that then I got to work with after college, decided to do not civil disobedience, where you're disobeying an unjust law from your faith and values, but they were saying our country isn't following our laws. So we're going to take civil initiative and welcome the immigrant and the stranger. And tens of thousands of people slept on the floors of Southside Presbyterian in Tucson, and my home church in Lozada, Minnesota, made the prophetic decision to welcome a man from El Salvador who fled because he didn't want to join the army and kill his neighbors. And this was before I was born, that they protected him, they worked with him. He built a family in the community, he became part of the community. I got to hear his story in like my confirmation classes when I was in high school, and they had to like fight his case with him for 20 years so that he wouldn't be deported. So this is part of what's shaped me and brought me to kind of the immigration justice work and kind of an entry point through Isaiah as well. And in the last few years, there's been a need to start another sanctuary movement. And in the wake of the Trump administration declaring, like putting more of our immigrant and refugee neighbors at risk, a set of political decisions, instilled a lot of fear in a lot of our neighbors here in Minnesota. And that was around when I was starting to get involved as a volunteer leader with Isaiah, like 2016, 2017, and joined staff August 2017. And basically overnight, 50 churches stepped up and said that they would become a sanctuary church or a sanctuary supporting church. And I see you all doing a lot of that work now. And that was how I got some of our Rochester work started as well. There's the Rochester Interfaith Immigration Council that grew up from that movement. I got to partner with them, help get a lot of that going. And they've been not only ready for the Band-Aid work, but also thinking about how do we shape our systems so that we fully welcome the immigrant and the stranger here in Minnesota. So that's a little bit of my background, but recognizing all of these issues that may come up in our communities are interconnected. How do we build a people and planet-centered democracy where regular people are shaping the decisions that affect our lives? How do we take our faith and values and have a conversation in our faith communities about how we're living those things out? And this is the best place to wrestle with those things. Who's had tension with like faith and politics mixing before? Right? We're told we're not supposed to talk about those things. And yes, in faith communities, like your pastor can't tell you what party or what candidate to vote for, but we're trying to think about like, you know, how do we get outside of our like red hat, blue hat sometimes that may pit us against one another? How do we think about how our current systems are affecting us and people we love, because politics is personal? There's someone making decisions usually about us without us, especially in greater Minnesota. That can feel like, you know, people in St. Paul or DC aren't really listening to us, or they never come actually listen to our communities and hear what we need. But those decisions made at the national level or in St. Paul aren't just headlines. They're things that are impacting us, people we love, our communities. And we can have the conversation about what do our faith traditions say about those things, who we are to one another, that we're called to love our neighbors and see everyone as interconnected, that our health is interconnected, that our well-being is interconnected, that no matter our race, religion, gender, geography, we all deserve the chance to thrive here in Minnesota. And when we put our abundant resources together, we can do that. How does that feel so far? We can do that. And since the beginning of our country, there's always been a lot of resources concentrated in a few hands. And there's no good reason why in this richest country in the history of the world, anyone goes without what they need. There's no good reason. That's a violation to my values. That people are struggling for housing, for healthcare, for mental health care, for caring and stewarding our environment. That's what our faith tradition says we are called to do. And some are putting greed and like unimaginable profits above all of us having those basics. That is totally possible. So those are some of the things that I think about and wanted to reflect on with you all today, and just share a little bit more that Isaiah was thinking about this kind of question from the beginning, formed with mainly a set of Christian congregations around 2000. Like Mary was saying, like Protestant, Catholic, a set of organizations that were already doing good work asking these questions at their community level, recognizing, hey, maybe we could do more if we worked together on a larger scale, build more capacity together. That energy grew in the cities and partnered with another organization in St. Cloud, and the last few years especially has really grown to where I get to be part of leading our greater Minnesota work. So I run around southern Minnesota a lot, and these days, so I had started getting involved in the Northfield area, helped build up that base as kind of our first satellite site outside of the cities in southern Minnesota, helped build up some of our work in Rochester, and now, thank goodness, I have 2 colleagues based there now, so that is fantastic. So one is like me, that's Olivia. So she's organizing mainly Christian congregations, and then we have a growing Muslim coalition of over 40 mosques now involved in Minnesota. And my colleague Sala is based in Rochester, but he's building some connections in like Faribault, Owatonna. I'm bringing him over here as well, because I know there's 3 mosques in this area. And there's so much potential for us to meet our communities where we're at, hear what we need to thrive, see where those things intersect and where we can work on those things together. And then I am focusing more on building here in the Mankato-St. Peter area. So I hope to see much more of you going forward. And then, so really growing into greater Minnesota, beyond a spectrum of Christian congregations to include more mosques as well. We have our Kids Count on Us coalition, which organizes 500 community-based childcare centers across the state, and really hearing the childcare equation really isn't working for a lot of people. Neither side is working. It's not affordable for families, and those staff that are caring for our littlest Minnesotans, some of them have master's degrees and they're not paid living wages. We invest in a public good starting at age 5, public education. And at the most expensive time of parents' lives, while they're trying to work and care for their families and wages haven't increased as maybe much as they should for people to afford their lives, there's not enough childcare, there's not enough affordable childcare. And so we're trying to see this as a public good so that those workers are making living wages and families pay no more than 7% of their income for childcare. That's seen as like the gold standard, and we're working in that direction. And our Kids Count on Us coalition is really on the forefront of that nationally. And then kind of the other two coalitions that have really sprung up since COVID, our Young Adult Coalition has been trying to connect with young people where they're at, because many young people aren't part of faith institutions anymore. We're trying to figure out where can young people exercise their voice and what they care about, and be part of a multi-generational movement that also hears their needs, hears their urgency, hears their stakes too in the decisions made now are going to affect them the longest. So they're organizing on college campuses. I've worked with them, to try to engage some more students in this area as well. And then they're thinking about how do we also creatively connect with more young people that aren't really part of institutions anymore. So college campuses, and then like people under the age of 40, where do we meet? And sometimes that's at a brewery, right? So they're thinking really creatively about that. And then our rural organizing project. So Todd Lippert helped start our Northfield chapter, was a UCC minister, and built his church to be the anchor congregation in Northfield. Then he decided to take his faith and values and be one of our first leaders to run for state legislature. And he served for 2 terms and figured out how do we partner, how do we co-govern, where we know he shares our values and our agenda on the inside of state legislature, and partnered with us, regular people in his community, to figure out how do we get this done together. And then he was realizing there's a lot more good I can still do, and rural people are in pain. And a lot of our current politics are leaving them behind. So he started building our rural organizing project over the last 1.5 years, and so everywhere in between. So he's running around southern Minnesota as well as connecting more all across the state. And I forgot to mention our barbershop and Black congregation cooperative as well. So partnering with more African American communities in those spaces where they're already having people-centered discussions in the barbershops and in churches, hearing what those communities need, having the conversation that meets them where they're at as well, and how the systems have never fully worked for them, and how do we build a truly multiracial movement for the kind of Minnesota that we all deserve together. So, Mary, can we pass out this one? I don't want to come too close and make the microphone scream at you again. Can we pass out the faith agenda there? So Mary's going to pass out what we call our faith agenda. And this is, I've been talking at you for a little bit, and this is one of the places where I wanted to see what you all think about how we've shaped our agenda and our vision and values over the years. And then we'll pivot towards how could we put this more into practice. So in 2017, I'll let her pass that out.
Oh, it's only one sheet.
Yep, the faith agenda is just one sheet. Thank you, Mary. So in 2016, 2017, a lot of our people were really concerned, hurting, worried about the implications of the Trump administration. And the way our organization works isn't like our director in her office writing what we should do, writing our agenda, writing our priorities. We had to respond to a lot of the concerns coming out to our community right away, kind of some rapid response, especially around immigrant protection. And chasing ambulances and playing defense also is exhausting. So we needed to figure out how to shift to what we were for and what was going to be our North Star that guided all of our work of how do we put our faith and values into action and shape the beloved community that we know is possible here in Minnesota. And we focus on like local and state in Minnesota. We're part of some national networks, but just wanted to make sure I said that out loud too. So we had 5,000 people across the state in intentional conversations. We trained regular people like you all to have conversations in their congregations, in their homes. People invited like their friends, people they know and love, into house meetings. There were conversations in the barber shops, one-on-one conversations in coffee shops, and brought those themes back together to shape what are we for? 5,000 people, like you all, helped shape that. And I wasn't here, so I didn't get to ask what you all wanted to contribute to that in 2017. But I'm gonna say, we're at this stage again now. So that's why I wanted to hear from you all today, more in a little bit, about what is speaking to your faith and values, what kinds of issues are coming up here that we should work on next together, I hope. So that is a living, breathing document. That's our faith agenda, kind of our vision statement. And Bob was kind of naming some of the tools in the toolbox earlier of how do we make that a reality. And it looks different in different seasons. Sometimes it's encouraging people to vote in your local elections. Sometimes it's lots of intentional conversations to hear what our communities need. And we do that year round, but some seasons, like right now, it's a bigger focus. And sometimes we bring what we've heard these priorities to be into spaces of decision making, like the caucuses, like the state legislature, like a city level campaign, like the city of Northfield did in 2016, 17, 18, for the city to commit to 100% clean energy by 2040, even before the state did. So there's ways that we've made those things possible, but it starts from this kind of vision setting, and then we figure out how do we make that a reality, and lots of people taking action by having conversations with their decision makers, writing letters to the editor, going to the Capitol in a bus when we can, right? And inviting our elected officials to meet with us because they're supposed to work for us. So I'm curious, you all have taken a couple minutes to look at that faith agenda, and I'm curious to hear what's resonating, what do you think is missing, what questions are coming up for you all? Yeah.
Pretty basic. What makes this a faith agenda? Why that term?
Sure. So that's a great question. What makes it a faith agenda? And I think because our organization has been primarily faith-based, that's how we wanted to say people from a wide variety of faith traditions have said, this is what our faith and values say about who we are to one another and how we want to put that forward together. So people come from a variety of different backgrounds and this is what we can agree on. And we don't work on all of the issues. Some issues would split our people apart. So this is what we can come together and agree on. I will say the name Faith Agenda is actually, since our organization has changed so much in the last few years and included more people of shared values and not necessarily faith institutions, that's still the heart of our organization, but barbershops and college campuses and the Rural Organizing Project are inviting in more people of shared values to shape our beloved community together in decision-making bodies. I think we're also in that kind of rediscernment process of what we should call our vision statement. Does that help?
Yes.
Thank you.
When you're talking about a faith sometimes I find that people are threatened by the religious aspect, but as how we interact after Sunday. Can faith connections mean I have faith in a philosophy that you share? So you can approach it and have discussions from a different perspective?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So, kind of a good question, and trying to repeat in case others need that too. So, is faith, can they say like faith in a philosophy, faith in an idea, not necessarily from a faith tradition? And I think that's been a question that I've been asking my whole life too, of how do we, especially as Christians, not just experience and feel good about ourselves or feel comfortable on a Sunday morning, but you all were getting that provocation today of how do we do good, and that's not just on a Sunday morning, check a box, but in everything that we do. And that for us in this room, like we're wrestling with that question of how do we live that out, and that comes from our faith tradition. For other people, that doesn't come from a faith tradition, from a place of values. So I think that's where we wanted to broaden that conversation of what has led people to, hopefully, a shared value of a multiracial democracy where everyone can thrive here in Minnesota. And if we can ask that question, no matter where that comes from for people, we can figure out what we do about it. Yeah.
So, like, you were talking about what other organizations. So, like, a group that meets for trauma experiencers or going through a life experience that is difficult. That might be an opportunity to, we all have faith in hope in surviving. Questions of how are we gonna do that? Would that be an appropriate forum to also join on the basis of the fight together for faith?
Sure. So
it doesn't always have to be a positive entity in which you connect?
I think, we do partner with so many other organizations where we find like aligned interests.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So like we're organizing the people that are like resonant with this idea and figuring it out together, and then we partner with so many other organizations. So like on healthcare work, we've worked with a variety of unions, the nurses union, SEIU healthcare. We partner a lot with Education Minnesota, who works primarily on public education. That's like the teachers union of Minnesota, and where we have aligned goals and interests. And that may look different on the state level, it may look different issue by issue. Like we've been part of the 100% campaign for climate justice in Minnesota, and that's 50 plus organizations, some who have had a very, maybe much more narrow mission towards climate and environmental justice. And in the last few years, we're figuring out, okay, we've all kind of been chipping away at the edges, but not necessarily making the big scale impact that we need to in this time for us to address the climate crisis at the speed and scale that we need to. So we, Sierra Club, Minnesota 350, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, literally 45 other ones that I can't remember right now, right? Decided to work together towards some big scale policy changes. But we all organize regular people, starting from that standpoint and hearing what we need, and also working with people who know things about those issues, experts, right? We need both. We need lots of regular people. Meet them where they're at, hear what our communities need, figure out what we can do about it together, and then strategize how do we get it done. And also, who else? Who else would share those goals? Who else would align with that mission? And yeah, we do primarily faith-based organizing and people of shared values, and work with a lot of other organizations and align where we can so we can get more good done together. So I think that's our good question of how do we get the most good done for the most people? And on the local level, that's part of what I'm curious about, is who are the other potential partners that are doing good work where we could make more happen together. Does that answer your question? And if you have ideas about who to partner with, let's chat more afterwards. Other things that are resonating or questions, reactions to this, yeah.
Kathryn, can you talk about what Isaiah has been doing in the state legislature, what your initiatives are, successes maybe that you've had as an organization?
Sure. That was what I was going to get to anyway, so you prompted me well.
All right.
About how have we been working on the state legislature? Before I get there, I just wanted to double check, are there any other things coming up on our faith agenda, or you're like, this looks great, how do we do this?
I thought you said that there were some issues that you have chosen as an organization not to deal with because it's potentially divisive amongst your groups. What would be an example? Any example?
Sure, good question. So what issues might potentially be divisive for an organization that we decide not to work on? So one is abortion, so reproductive rights, or that conversation would split our people. So some congregations might work on that one way or the other, but as the entirety organization of Isaiah, we do not. And then we did go through a discernment process the last few years for the organization. I know every denomination maybe has different terminology around this, to be doing more LGBTQ inclusion work, welcoming and inclusion, reconciling in Christ, the Lutheran thing. Okay, there we go. So we did
the full gender justice.
Yeah,
is
the
what
full
you
gender
said.
justice is part of the faith agenda, and I think that's still how do we do that well? So we did go through that process a few years ago to basically say Isaiah is an open and affirming organization. Some faith institutions, some parts of our organization might work more directly on those issues than others. And that discernment, though, was before our Muslim coalition started. So when they came in, they decided, they were realizing okay, we as Muslim communities in Minnesota recognize we can't fully protect our communities and have what our communities need if we only work alone. We need a multiracial, multi-faith movement, and Isaiah is a powerful organization to partner with, and they basically negotiated with us to say, we want to bring on a set of mosques to be members of Isaiah, but we want to stay the Muslim coalition of Isaiah so that we're also recognizing our cultural and religious identity within the whole organization. And many within their faith tradition wrestle with LGBTQ issues, and so some of that is still also in tension within the organization. So we're figuring out what that looks like, but we have partnered with organizations like Out Front Minnesota, which I think works more directly on LGBTQ inclusion and policy work on the state level, but we've been in coalitions with them. So does that help?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another group, it's not Isaiah, it's, can't remember the group, I've sat in on some things, some interviews with candidates, and they talked about betting. Betting within Minnesota being a public, we don't have the same kind of betting in Minnesota that they do in other states, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the reason why, is because there are many people.
Betting
who
like
don't-
gambling?
Betting, yeah,
I'm thinking betting.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Betting.
Sports betting.
Sport,
Okay, you know,
sports,
sports,
mainly the sports betting we don't have. People who bet on sports, they do it online, don't they? And it's another state that's running it or something. We cannot do it in Minnesota. So I was in on one where some people were definitely not wanting this to pass, and some in the group were said it was okay to pass it. So this was a legislator with this person who was getting both sides of his constituents to know that he probably has to make that decision just himself, because somebody's not gonna be happy with him.
Yeah.
But that's another controversial kind of issue that probably we wouldn't get into with this.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So just uplifting, sports betting in particular has been an issue in discussion in many communities and at the legislature that Isaiah has not weighed in on. I haven't heard that's a top priority of anyone. I follow a legislator on Twitter that is close to, on X, sorry. that is like close to the Northfield area, and that's like the top thing that he talks about. I was like, I literally never hear anyone talking about this. So we try to be responsive to what we're hearing from our people, and then where are we finding the most like common ground, and we make a set of decisions based on like the conditions of decision making. Like politics is ultimately collective decision making. Sometimes we can think about it as only like one party or another, but we get to decide together how our resources are distributed. Some place more value on some people's lives than others. And we need to like step into those collective decisions, like rooted in what we, our loved ones, our communities need. And from our faith and values, we're not trying to like convert anyone else, but we're saying this is how we think those values should be articulated in the world. And yeah, then we're like, okay, there's some things that we're like, we hear our communities need this, we're really glad some partners are taking the lead on that, because if we try to work on every issue under the sun, we also get spread too thin and then do no good, right? Thank you for coming. Thanks. Any other questions on the faith agenda stuff, or should we shift to how we've turned that into state legislative priorities and worked for years to finally win some things this year? Okay. So I think many of your tables, Mary can pass out more if you need it, have this Isaiah's legislative wins document. Take that home. There's a lot more in there, and I just want to highlight a few of the biggest pieces today, and then gauge from you all what's resonating, and what do you think we should work on next based on, we didn't fix all the things yet. We made a lot of good for a lot of people, and we didn't fix all the things yet, okay? So, what I want to say is, so again, we've been working for a number of years on these issues. Sometimes more local campaigns will get wins concretely for people along the way and demonstrate all across the state of Minnesota. This is where our greater Minnesota work is so important, because sometimes ways that some try to divide us are by where we live. And people in the urban areas might say, well, people in greater Minnesota will never go for that. So it matters that we're saying, here's what our communities need, and if we can show most Minnesotans across the state want these things, how do we work with our decision makers to get them done? So we've been working for years and years and years to push up a set of issues that would make a lot of good for people in Minnesota and create the conditions at the state level to get them done. There was no guarantee that they would get done even this year, but have some of you been tracking? This has been probably the most progress made in Minnesota in like 50 years, this one legislative session. We've gotten a lot of good done in a short amount of time, and some of the things I don't even know about, so I want to see like what you all care about, what you have questions about. I may not be able to answer every question, but I'll certainly take down notes and try to get back to you all. But some of the things that Isaiah worked on, and again, every single one of these things was in coalition, but here's the things that I want to name, like we took the lead on and with partners to get them across the finish line this year. So I'll put them in 3 buckets. We talked about working towards racial, economic, and climate justice in Minnesota. So towards inclusive democracy, there were 2 things that have been on the table, worked on in Minnesota for 20 years. And we finally got them done this year. So the first one, towards immigrant justice, like you all have been working on in your faith and values, a main policy priority, so that all of our immigrant neighbors could be full participants in our state, is driver's licenses for all. So in 2003, so Minnesota actually used to provide driver's licenses to all Minnesota residents that obviously could take the test, qualify for one, prove you're a safe driver, all Minnesota residents regardless of citizenship, until 2003, when Governor Pawlenty used anti-immigrant fear-mongering in the wake of 9/11 to take those away. And this has been a priority for us and a number of immigrant-led organizations like Unidos to restore driver's licenses for all. And we've been working hard to do that on the state level and even do some things in the meantime, like pass city-level IDs, which we did in Northfield and in Rochester and then in Minneapolis. for people to be able to say like, this is who I am, and I'm a resident of this city, and to like do life, right? How many ways do you need an ID? And the biggest way to reconcile that is a driver's license at the state level. And so this year we really followed the lead of immigrant-led organizations and finally restored driver's licenses for all. The other piece towards inclusive democracy that's been a 20-year fight that primarily our barbershop and Black congregation cooperative took the lead on and built coalition with other partners is restore the vote. So 55,000 neighbors in Minnesota are living in our communities after incarceration, but Minnesota has had some of the shortest incarceration sentences, but some of the longest probation and parole, sometimes decades. And before they were prohibited from voting until they were off paper, until they were out of probation or parole. So they would be in community, expected to be full participants, but not allowed to have their voice heard. So we've simplified that, and actually the Secretary of State office has said this makes things simpler to be able to say when you're in community, out of jail or prison, you can vote. So we restored the vote to 55,000 neighbors across the state of Minnesota. And from the research, it actually disproportionately affects people in greater Minnesota. Another package towards inclusive democracy, this is kind of the big shebang that had a whole lot of good stuff in it, was the Democracy for the People Act. So it included automatic voter registration. So rather than you having to like tell government, here's where I live, here's who I am, here's why I want to register to vote, and when you move or things like that, that gets complicated, especially for people who rent or move often. Now, when you interact with government, they just like automatically update your voter registration for you, and you have to opt out. So trying to make it easier for regular people to participate. Another piece of that is pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. So young people getting to be feeling like they're part of the system, they're ready to participate, they're ready to like take action. The second they turn 18, they can pre-register, and then it like goes live when they turn 18. And so their data would already be in the Secretary of State's office, all their good back-end work, and it goes live, makes it easy for them to participate. And so lots of partner organizations, I think like League of Women Voters is one of them that really focuses on like voter registration. And so now they're like partnering with high schools to get young people ready to roll. It's exciting. And then the Democracy for the People Act also has some pieces like language justice and more accessibility for neighbors that need some extra assistance to be able to fully participate. So some materials need to be translated, some people need an interpreter. Our Muslim Coalition especially worked on that. And then I'm probably forgetting more than I'm remembering, but those are some of those pieces that are in that package that we think about how do we make it safer for people to participate. Oh, another one is that it has extra support for people who are like working the polls. Because there's been intimidation of people that are just trying to facilitate everybody else getting to have their voice heard. Question?
There are other not fashionably really recognized, like disability organizations. I work with a group called We Can Ride, and it's hard to get funding for private, some of the private, and things like insurance is astronomical. But these people need the opportunity to have, they're not broken, they still have voices, they're not mentally, but they have the same beliefs, the same faiths, the same desire to make better, but because they're not one of the fashionable hot point terms, they kind of don't get recognized. But there's so much to give from them.
Yeah.
Is that too far-fetched of an area to really get a big community of, we need this and this is how we could contribute?
Yeah, thank you. Are you thinking about like voting in particular, or more of the like
Both.
caring economy, like disability justice?
Here's what I
Yeah.
need to be a thriving,
Yeah,
contributing
yeah,
member of
Yeah.
society.
yeah.
Some of them can't, some of the places they have to vote don't have ramps.
Mm.
So, and they just get overlooked because people associate certain kinds of disabilities like whatever it is with not being mentally competent.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think let's chat more because I'd
Yeah,
love to
I would
hear
love
more from
to.
your
I would love
experiences
to.
too. And I know the Democracy for the People Act like does include more funding for accessibility, and I don't entirely know what all is in there. So we should find
I
out
would love
and
to.
what's still missing, because I think that's a good question of like both. It's the intersection of the inclusive democracy bucket and the caring economy bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we share languages on another personal level with groups within we are organized, it's stronger. There's more communal
Yeah.
bond, and those are easier areas for us to recognize faith, commonalities, and it's strong and it's very bonding and it is powerful.
Yeah.
But they're just kind of sort of okay. We can meet these needs, but not your emotional needs that go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know all the things, so I'd love to learn more from you. And this is why we do this, right? We can't assume, like, we're the experts of our experiences, and then we have so much to learn from each other, and that's why we do, like, communal politics, communal decision-making, because who's getting left behind if we're not having this kind of conversation? John, do you want to jump in?
I was gonna say, I think she's right, because I serve as election judge,
Hmm.
and I've been assigned to an
Thank you.
area where a lot of people who live in group homes near there come to vote, but they'll bring along their PCA, it might be their transportation person, it might be someone who's helping them just function along the line, and I can hear other people whispering and saying, I bet that person's telling them how to vote, and I just think it's unfair.
That's a good possibility.
Yeah, thanks, Don, for raising that, because we've heard that from our immigrant neighbors as well, that when they bring interpreters, some assume they're getting told how to vote, and it sounds like same for,
Yeah, it just seems
folks who
unfair,
live in a
because
group home.
they're here to participate like everyone else in line.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, and again, thank you for your service as an election judge. Like, we need that, right? Yeah, Mary.
And if Luke Frederick, the representative from this area, this is something he's of great interest to him. So if you contacted Luke Frederick, you're the representative from Mankato, this year and in future years, this is an interesting area for him, that he knows more needs to be done. And so you probably you could email him, that would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, yeah, Representative Frederick from the Mankato area. He's on the, I think he's on the Health and Human Services Committee as well as the Elections Committee.
He's on.
Exactly. So he works at the St. Peter Mental Health Hospital. So all of those things are like really near and dear to his heart, and some of the places that he can like make the biggest impact in the legislature. So we should follow up more. Thank you. Can share a little bit more on the two other buckets, and then love to have more of this discussion on like again what's resonating, what you're curious about, what do we need to go work on next. So on the climate bucket, for us to be good stewards and recognize that there were a set of fossil fuel companies that have put their profits over us, and they decided that before I was born, and it's going to take a whole lot of people power to make the biggest changes at speed and scale we need to. So as I was mentioning, we were part of the 100% coalition with 50 other organizations, and this year was kind of the flagship bill finally passed. So we've worked on these things for years. We passed it through the state house for a number of years, and it kept getting like shut down in the Senate. And this year it finally passed statewide. So Minnesota is now on the trajectory of 100% clean energy by 2040, and that is one sector.
It's for electricity.
It's for electricity.
I just want to clarify.
Clarify. Thank you, Drew.
Some people get very
Yes.
upset about it because there's a lot of things that still fossil fuel does for us.
Yes.
And we can't get on this train when we hear that. This is just electricity.
Yep.
Generation.
Yeah, so there's, I'm not a climate scientist. I know it's affecting us, and I'm trying to like follow the experts. And also, again, we're seeing the impacts already, and there's a lot we can do. So this is one of the 5 sectors they talk about and where we can really reduce greenhouse gas emissions and have a livable future. So this addresses the electricity sector. There's a lot more that we can and should be doing, and that's still a big conversation towards the next legislative sessions, and what we could also work on locally, like the intersections of climate and housing, like energy efficiency, so that we use less energy in the first place, so that we do use more renewables, homegrown energy like wind and solar in Minnesota, and lower people's utility bills at the same time. Wouldn't that be lovely? So there's a lot we can still do. The other big impact that we did, partnering with other organizations like Sierra Club and Move Minnesota, was addressing, so Minnesota's transportation sector is actually our #1 like climate pollution in Minnesota. And so the more that we're shifting to like clean energy vehicles, but also to more transportation and transit, that can really reduce our emissions. And so we passed like big transit funding in Minnesota. So the metro area, the 7-county metro area, I believe, is now doing 0.75% sales tax to transit. That will raise $500 million a year. So that will like update the metro area and enable them to reach out to more of the suburbs. They've been in a hole for years, and this will actually provide sustained funding. So that's super exciting. I will say, not as much funding for Greater Minnesota got passed. So I think there's still so much potential. Drew and I have already started that conversation of like, what do we gotta do here to connect our communities, to make sure people can move around and not need a car, and not just leave those that like, they can't drive, like good luck, but how do we create like an efficient, effective system that more people can use all the time? So connect our communities inside and to each other. So the other thing that I wanted to lift up that especially Representative Brand worked on from the St. Peter area, he's on the Transportation Committee, and they actually passed, this is like on the national forefront, they passed a requirement that the Minnesota Department of Transportation take greenhouse gas emissions into account as they're evaluating potential projects. So safety is still #1, but our climate impacts are #2. So thinking about that holistically will really benefit our communities and like that kind of systems-wide thinking going forward. And then on the caring economy bucket, one of the things that I got to work most directly on and that many of you helped make possible is paid family and medical leave. So we've been recognizing a care crisis in Minnesota for years, and especially in Greater Minnesota, more of us pitch in to care for our relatives, but also our neighbors. And Minnesota, or the United States, is one of 2 countries without any form of paid leave, so that people can just be fully human, care for ourselves and our loved ones when we need to, take the time off work we need to without worrying about losing our jobs or breaking the bank for like unpaid leave. When you have a new child, when you need to take care of yourself, when in my situation, when my mother-in-law had an accident at work and broke her elbow and her knee, we shouldn't just be lucky that my husband and I had understanding employers where we could drop everything and care for her and take her into our home for 3 months and help interpret sometimes, because she speaks Spanish. It shouldn't be down to luck. It shouldn't be down to what employer you have. Now, every Minnesota worker will get to take up to 12 weeks of most of your salary getting reimbursed. And the less you make, the more of your salary you get reimbursed. So it's on a sliding scale, and that's an equity piece as well. And that will really even the playing field with smaller businesses that wouldn't be able to like offer that on their own. So we all pitch in, and then everybody gets to like take the time they need when they need it. So that's, yeah, Drew.
I just want to give you a kudos because
Yeah.
we work a little bit together on that. Kathryn, you know, got my contact information, kept me in the loop, and she really worked hard on that. I'm gonna tell you, man. She's up there talking to all the state representatives and all the people. She saw it as a real need through using Isaiah, of course, as a means, I guess, to kind of lobby our state representatives and senators. And in the long run, I think it's really gonna be a good families. I have a son who's 33, they have their third daughter now, and he quit his job, a good job working for the city of Minneapolis, to stay home as a stay-at-home dad because it was just too expensive even just to do daycare. I mean, that's another whole nother realm, but
Yeah.
but I mean, that's an area that I think
Yeah.
we can have some discussion about, but the leave thing is so important to have our families intact. If you know anything about the studies of the first year of a child's life even, and how that impacts their future. There's so many studies out right now that even while the child is in the womb, if the mother's living a very upset life, not eating well, all those things affect the child into the future, and even maybe possibly generations. Things that we used to know as probably normal for families, we've kind of lost that whole thing. And so,
Well, recognizing that families don't come in traditional senses,
no,
and there is an enormous amount of respect to say for the Latino community. They're committed to every member of the family. So, I mean, it's not just your typical family.
Right, absolutely, and that's also one thing that we advocated for in the paid family leave bill, so that it would have a really inclusive definition of family. So that like, when you're expected to care for someone, it doesn't have to be like your blood relative,
It's
but they're closely connected
yeah,
to you.
It's a grandmother,
Absolutely.
it's a mother-in-law that is
Yeah.
still part of your community.
Absolutely, and like you were saying, like these things are interconnected. The ability to care for ourselves and one another, childcare, paid leave, healthcare, all interconnected. We've got a lot of work to do still on our healthcare system so that everybody gets the affordable care that they need close by. And the stepping stone that we and other organizations passed this year too was a public option, so that the Minnesota Care program, that is like a public insurance program, currently limits people to access if you make 200% of the federal poverty level or lower, and also excludes undocumented neighbors. So we work with Unidos a lot. Like this was not assured, this was the last like 4 days of legislative session that we got it across the finish line. So now by 2027, any Minnesota resident should be able to buy into that good insurance program already, regardless of citizenship status. Yes,
yeah, I know.
thank you. And just wanted to name too, $1 billion for childcare, $1 billion for housing. Those are incredible big wins and not enough. We've got more work to do. And just wanted to, back to Drew's point of like, regular people made this happen. We organized with people like you all, Drew and Mary in particular, were part of some of the like activities to keep showing regular people expected our elected officials to deliver on these things this year. By like tons of contacts to legislators, we had lots of strategy meetings, we shaped the narrative with social media, letters to the editor. We did a faith leader sign-on letter for paid family leave with like, I think at least 12 faith leaders from this area, including Pastor JC signed on to that. And then there were key moments where we like carpooled to the Capitol, which I know is far away, and we're really glad to be part of a statewide organization where more of our like people who live close could get there more often. But we did carpools when we could, and primarily my job was to bring the Capitol to us. By Zoom, we asked the legislators to meet with us in like lots of iterations during legislative session, and how can we work with you to get these things across the finish line. Like our like culmination was 80 neighbors in a room at First Congregational UCC in Mankato with Representative Frederick was able to join us for that day of how do we get these things across the finish line, how do we partner with you. And we also like had a group like 10 of us near the end of session when like paid family leave was almost ready to pass. We did one last push. We sent people out with literature across the district to like drop that at neighbors' doors. Like, here's what's possible. If you want this, call your legislator, right? So different tools in the toolbox, lots of leadership training. Regular people are supposed to shape our democracy. It's supposed to work for us. So we get to figure it out along the way. So we're almost at our time. I know I've talked at you for a bit. I'm curious, what else is coming up for people around what do you and your loved ones need? Some of those issues have started coming up, and I've been taking notes. What do you think we should work together on next for people in the Mankato St. Peter area to thrive? What should I carry up to our next statewide agenda priorities? You can also keep thinking about it, because I'll give you a sheet and you can send me more notes. And
I'll just put another
Yeah.
voice in for transportation
thank you.
within the city.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that?
I'd like to hop a bus and go to my office, but it's not convenient.
Yeah.
And my husband, is from another country, he has a driver's license here, but we have one vehicle and, just would make a lot more sense for his independence and for mine,
Yeah.
really, because I'm responsible for him.
I needed metro mobility and I didn't qualify because, I didn't have the diagnosis yet of what was going on. I couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't do anything because I didn't qualify for metro mobility.
True
Wow,
true
thank you.
transit can be called though. We have transit, we have transportation money for our area, for our county and a couple other counties, so True Transit, look that up. TRU Transit.
And I also wanna say for those that don't have their own vehicle.
Yeah.
I know a lot of single mothers who live in, certain apartment buildings and they're constantly calling friends to get to mental health appointments, grocery store, everything, and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Thank you. It's we haven't figured it out in greater Minnesota yet, and there's a lot we can and should be doing. And let's continue that conversation. Thank you. More to do on transit and transportation. Yeah, Drew?
I know there's other efforts going on in transit, around Minnesota. True Transit technically can only give rides mainly to people if they're going from Mankato to the rural area, or vice versa. So that's a limitation that they have. But the city, just this last year, I think got a huge grant of dollars through our transit office in Minnesota to help solve some of these problems that you were mentioning, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
So I would try to call the city again and ask them what's going on.
It shouldn't take 2 hours to be
Right.
able to get from point A to point B
Yeah.
in
No.
Mankato.
Yeah,
Right.
And 2 hours on the phone to wait to be able to talk to
yeah,
somebody.
call 311 and just ask, because 311 is the immediate access to our city staff.
Oh.
And it's just like, 311 is like 911, but it's not an emergency, so you can call and say there's a dog barking for 4 hours in the backyard. Really?
Yeah.
But, the other thing I'd like to say, because I've entered this world the last few years, and I already interacted a little bit with Kathryn, but I just don't think we need to keep up and don't forget about our senior issues, because all of our seniors in Minnesota, we've got a large contingency of seniors in Minnesota. We've got 1 million seniors living in Minnesota. Just think of that.
1/5 of the population.
Yeah, it's a huge number.
Yeah.
And, I just think if we drop the ball, we need to really listen to our seniors and find out what's going on. When I was serving as a county commissioner, I go to the, Public Utility Commission, or some of these meetings in town, when Excel would set up a meeting, or Centerpoint. Every 2 years, they ask for like a 10, 15, 18% increase in their rates. You know what I mean? And they just blanketly do it, and just kind of routinely, they get half whatever they ask for every time, and it just keeps going up. It's a small thing. It's a small thing. But you've got seniors all over the place that hardly use any electricity. They use a very small amount. But their rates keep going up. And I think there needs to be a different system, personally, for how we divvy out the power.
And those are all people who could vote.
They can vote, but we don't have any plan for like, people who use less electricity, maybe they should get a break. Instead, the ones that are using tremendous amounts of electricity, they get the break. They get the discounts. The system is backwards as far as I'm concerned. So I think seniors, if you live in a little apartment somewhere and you're taking care of business and you've lived your whole life in Minnesota or wherever you've been, you should be taken care of.
Yeah.
Instead of you paying on the backs of these big, huge utility companies who at will pretty much raise their rates and get at least half what they ask for every single 2 years. And so anyway, just one small thing,
Absolutely.
but all these things are going up.
Yeah.
Our property taxes are going up, the rents are going up, and it really affects people who are getting like a $1,200 social security check.
Yeah, and
It's very-
wages have not. Costs of
Oh,
life
it's
have
gone
been
up.
increased, and the biggest corporations have said, we've gotten record profits,
Oh, they all
while
have.
most of us are struggling.
Yep.
They can pitch in more, so that we all have what we need.
Something.
Thanks for lifting up senior issues as well. Bob?
Give you a chance to plug Isaiah. How can our members get involved with
Yeah.
Isaiah as to join Mary and the other
Perfect,
folks?
thank you, Bob. So I'm happy to stick around, 'cause I know, again, we didn't hear from all of you, we didn't solve everything we need to. So I'm happy to stick around if people would like to chat more. I'll have Mary pass out our commitment form, so you all have the invitation to discern, to decide what you might want to do going forward, even if it's like, hey, I wanna have coffee with Kathryn, I would love to do that. And pick your brains, learn more from you all of what you care about and why and how we could work together. Again, on top of the good work that you're already doing, build more capacity with you individually, as a congregation, with other congregations in the area and statewide potentially. So those commitment forms going around are for your individual discernment to put those next steps of your faith into action. So I just thank you all for being part of this discussion today. I hope to keep the conversation going because, again, it shouldn't just be a one-off. Hope to build more of those relationships with you and your congregation. So you can fill out those commitment forms. You can leave them on your table if you want to. Take a minute if you're able, and then we'd love to follow up with y'all, but I'll be around for a bit if you need me. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time, for your discernment, for how you're already putting your faith into action. So look forward to partnering more. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kathryn.